When most companies build an AI strategy, they chase shiny trends instead of aligning AI with revenue, profit, and ROI. But the winners of the next decade won't just bolt on shiny new AI tools. Instead, they'll re-architect their entire organizations around AI. And that's why the Chief AI Officer, or CAIO, is about to become one of the most important roles in the executive suite. In this video, I'll explain what a CAIO is, why your company will likely need one, and how a CAIO, Chief AI Officer, is different than a CTO and a CIO. And furthermore, I'll explain the skills that you're going to need to look for in a CAIO so that they can be successful in your business. First, before we talk about the Chief AI Officer role itself and the various skills that it's going to need, let's just talk about why this role is emerging. I think it's becoming increasingly clear at the executive level that AI isn't just going to be a side project. Many executives are starting to realize that AI is going to be central to driving revenue, driving profit, and winning against their competition. In fact, my contention is that the best businesses of the next decade or two are going to be strongly AI-centric. I think that there will be some exceptions, but I think that the vast majority of winners over the next 10 to 20 years will integrate AI and use it to maximum effect. By the way, I actually think that this is true of the last 1 or 2 decades, in the sense that all of the really big winners, Amazon, Facebook, Google, Netflix, they were strong adopters of the previous wave of AI. We call this machine learning. Machine learning is more of a classic form of AI, and in fact, all modern AI, like large language models, are types of machine learning. So what I'm saying is that in the last 10 or 20 years, the absolute best companies, the big winners, adopted AI and integrated it to maximum effect. And the big winners of the next 10 to 20 years are also going to adopt AI and integrate it to maximum effect. The problem, of course, is that most executives lack the technical skill, specifically in AI, and also lack some of the strategic knowledge for how to use it and apply those skills for business problems. So they're not really able to lead AI initiatives and integrate AI successfully into the business. Furthermore, many boards and executives are realizing that this isn't just more IT. It's something different, and it's going to require, in many cases, an enterprise-wide transformation, which will require a unique set of skills, starting all the way from the top. So it's probably going to require a new C-suite executive. So now that we've talked about why the role is emerging, let's talk about the CAIO role itself. The CAIO, Chief AI Officer, is responsible for AI adoption and integration into the business. But I would actually maybe frame it a slightly different way. The core role of a Chief AI Officer is connecting business strategy to the technology itself. Let me explain. A lot of companies, as they're thinking about adopting AI, are just starting with the tools themselves. They know certainly about large language models. They want to use large language models more. And in many cases, this looks like we need to use ChatGPT, and that's kind of the AI strategy. I'm also seeing a lot of business leaders start talking about agents. They've heard that agents are going to be transformative, and they say, we need AI agents in our business. I think this is precisely the wrong way to go about it. And it's okay if you've been there, but I want you to think about it maybe a slightly different way. The Chief AI Officer needs to think about what business problem is being solved, and then figuring out the right AI tools and techniques. And then after those tools and techniques are chosen, then you figure out what skills, what people, what data assets, what infrastructure do we need to support that tool use. So you're sort of starting with the problem, then choosing the AI technique, then figuring out all of the other tools and techniques and people and assets that you need. But a Chief AI Officer needs to know enough about business and AI and technology at all of those different levels to be able to integrate that successfully and help answer those questions. Let me get a little more concrete on this. So what I said is the CAIO needs to be able to connect the business goals to the techniques and technology. So a CAIO needs to be able to ask the question, what are we trying to do? Are we trying to increase revenue, or are we trying to increase profit? Are we trying to manage our costs? If you're trying to drive revenue, you're going to use one set of techniques. And to be honest, it's probably not an LLM and maybe not an agent, although agents might have uses for driving revenue. And if you're trying to drive revenue, are you trying to get more customers, or are you trying to increase the average revenue per customer? These are different problems. If you're trying to just increase the number of customers, you're probably going to use a different set of tools and techniques, maybe to support your sales team, do some sales call analytics and modeling. You can probably use some LLMs for that, but there are some other tools that you might want to use. Furthermore, if you're just trying to drive revenue, you might have a churn problem. You are not going to use a large language model for that. You're probably going to use what we call a classification system to predict churn in your business. It's a different type of AI than a large language model. If you're trying to increase the average revenue per customer, going to use a different set of tools. You might want to build some upsell propensity models to try and upsell your customers to a higher service level. You might also want to use some tools and techniques to maybe recommend other products and services. That's more like cross sales. That requires a different set of tools and techniques. And you can just go on and on like this. If you're trying to solve a brand problem, you're going to use a different set of techniques. If you're just trying to improve your marketing, there's yet a different set of techniques, and so on. So a chief AI officer needs to understand those different types of problems, but then needs to understand which tools and techniques actually solve those problems. Is it a large language model? Is it an AI agent? Is it a predictive model? Is it an unsupervised model? Now, I'm kind of throwing out some technical terms, but you're going to need to be a little bit familiar with those things as you start talking to potential AI leaders. Your AI leaders and chief AI officers need to know those things. And then, as I suggested earlier, once you have figured out the problem and figured out the precise tool or technique you're going to use, then the chief AI officer needs to understand, okay, well, if we're going to use that technique, we need these data assets, we need this type of technology infrastructure, we're going to have these types of inference problems that we need to solve, and we need these types of people as talent in our organization to support the development and deployment. So to sort of sum up, the lens of the chief AI officer is, what problem are we solving? What tools and techniques will solve those problems? And what data and people and assets and infrastructure do we need to implement those tools? Next, speaking of deploying AI tools and techniques, let's talk about the specific skills that a chief AI officer will need in order to facilitate AI integration, system building, and deployment. So I want business leaders and executives to understand what to look for. First of all, a CAIO is going to need technical fluency in the various types of AI. To give you a quick overview, there are a few main types. We have generative AI, which you're probably familiar with. This includes large language models. They're generally good anytime you're going to generate text. So GPT style systems, code generators, copilots, RAG systems, which I've talked about in a separate video. They're usually good for integrating your documents into your generative AI and workflows. So generative AI is one type. We also have supervised learning, which is also largely known as predictive models. This is a different type of AI, and it has different requirements. If you need to make predictions in your business, you are not going to use a large language model for the most part. You're probably going to use a supervised learning system. So this includes making predictions around things like churn or upsell propensity, predicting sales numbers, things like that. This is a different type of AI, and it uses largely a different type of data. It has different data assets that are required. It also has different pitfalls. So a CAIO is going to need to know how supervised learning models are built and the sorts of assets, infrastructure, people, talent, etc., that are required for supervised learning models. There's also unsupervised learning models, which are slightly different. They largely find structure in data, very good for marketing and product strategy. We also have AI agents, which are sort of like artificial employees. Personally, I don't think that AI agents are perfectly ready for prime time. We are seeing the deployment of some types of AI agents, but they sometimes underperform and they can be very finicky in how they work. So you need to get them just right. Although I will say that I think that AI agents are going to become much more powerful as we have new tools and also new large language models to build into these agentic systems. As all of those components get better, AI agents will get better. And I do think that we are eventually going to see deployment of AI agents in ways that increase productivity, drive revenue, drive profitability inside of businesses. CAIOs are going to need to understand how AI agents work and how they are built and structured. Beyond just technical fluency, they're going to need to have some business acumen. So, as I said previously, a chief AI officer is going to need to be able to connect business goals and problems to the AI tools and techniques. So, they need to understand how businesses generally work. They're going to need to understand metrics like revenue and profit. They'll need to understand marketing metrics like customer lifetime value, conversion rates. They'll need to understand customer acquisition, financial statements, thinking through how different AI tools and techniques might affect the P&L, the profit and loss statement. Maybe a little bit downstream of that, how do different AI tools and techniques, how might they affect the balance sheet? So a CAIO is going to need to have some pretty serious business fluency, understanding the different business units, how they operate, different business metrics, and how different AI tools and techniques will influence those things. Beyond business fluency, they'll also need to have a certain level of facility with systems thinking, thinking through processes, workflows, organization structures, because AI is going to rework how we build processes and systems inside of organizations. And it's also going to kind of remodel organizations themselves. This will be particularly true as we begin to deploy AI agents at scale. So they'll need to be able to think through how AI is going to affect the business at a system level. A CAIO will also need to understand data. So what data assets are required for different tools and techniques. They'll need to have some understanding of data governance as well as data security. And last among the skills, I think this is maybe a little bit overlooked, but I think it's going to be extremely important, is change management. I think that AI is going to cause a lot of disruption in existing businesses. So a chief AI officer is going to need to be comfortable helping lead people through the changes that are going to take place as AI gets deployed. Next, let's quickly talk about the differences between the CIO, Chief Information Officer, CTO, Chief Technology Officer, and the CAIO. They're all kind of related in the sense that they connect to technology in some way. But Chief Information Officers are primarily concerned with running internal IT systems and managing information risk. So they often own things like enterprise apps, things like CRMs. They handle networks and cloud, things like storage systems, access to internet, access to information systems. They handle identity and general application access, logins, things like that, as well as data governance and technology compliance. Now, some of those things might shift a little bit as chief AI officers enter the picture. I think that CAIOs might have more of a role in data governance going forward, but let's set that aside. Now, chief technology officers are typically responsible for building and scaling the product and technology platforms. This includes product engineering, software engineering, platform engineering, architecture, DevOps, system reliability, building out a technology roadmap for the company, and so on. But both of those roles, the CIO and CTO, are obviously different from the CAIO. Remember, the role of the CAIO is to connect business strategy to AI solutions. So as I suggested previously, figuring out what problems the business is trying to solve, choosing the right AI tools and techniques, figuring out the data assets and other types of assets that will be required, and also consulting inside of specific business units to help those business units deploy AI correctly. So they're going to need to be able to help the marketing department deploy marketing related AI tools and techniques. They'll need to be able to talk to the finance people to help the finance people use AI properly. They'll need to be able to do the same thing inside of operations and so on. So the CAIO is going to be a new and separate role, I think, in the vast majority of cases, partially because CTOs and CIOs, like many other executives, unfortunately, they lack a lot of the AI knowledge and sophistication that's going to be required for the role. Most CTOs, and I think unfortunately the vast majority of CIOs, simply aren't going to have enough AI knowledge around a lot of the things that I described previously. So the specific types of tools and techniques, the different types of machine learning and AI, how those systems are built and structured, the sorts of assets that are required, the sorts of problems that a business is likely to encounter as they start building those systems out, how to fix those problems, how to manage inference, and so on. This in many ways is very different. It touches a couple of those other things, the data governance of a CIO. It touches some of the DevOps of a CTO. They do have some connections and a little bit of overlap, but AI is so different in so many ways, and it's such a complex field. I think this is going to be a very specific skill set, and most businesses will require a separate C-suite executive to manage internal AI. So as we begin to close out, I want you to walk away with the understanding that the chief AI officer is going to be necessary in almost every business. AI is going to become an increasingly large part of most companies. I think many companies are going to become really AI-centric or AI-first businesses. And as that happens, companies will need executive leadership with the right skills and a unique set of skills that's different from a CIO or a CTO. Without this sort of centralized leadership, you're likely to have a lot of confusion. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that right now. But moreover, failed pilots, wasted spend, and ultimately insufficient adoption. So without a CAIO, you're likely to have problems. But with a CAIO, you're likely to see more complete adoption, more successful pilots, more efficient spending on AI initiatives, and ultimately AI that drives revenue, profit, productivity, and business success. Remember, the companies that thrive in the AI era won't be those that just have a couple of AI chatbots or simple agents. The companies that win will be those that have a clear strategy, the right data, the right people, and the right systems in place. And the chief AI officer will be the executive that makes sure that those things are in place and that helps drive successful business transformation around AI. So if you're serious about AI, start thinking, who's going to own this in our company? Because without a CAIO level leader, you're going to fall behind fast. If you like this video, please hit like and subscribe. And if you think someone that you know might benefit from it, please share it.